problems together by combining historical, climate, food, and economic data so you can make informed decisions as we shift into a new era. Here's what was, this is what's coming. Our world is never going back to 2019, so what will the new era look like? And most importantly, what is immediate that will affect the pocketbook and the outlook into next year so we can all get ready? Thank you for joining. I'm your host, David DuByne.
Right along.
Thank you for joining.
Some Godwin, who I hope can give me a sound check, because I'm trying to choose two different settings tonight on a microphone sound wire. Who I hope can give me. Oh, the world spins in a different direction this week suddenly. Do you feel that, like, oh, I just got kicked in the stomach kind of feeling after this attack with the Houthis? It is. The things I'm doing with my Patreon channel, that's mainly what I'm following, is like why your prices are going to rise because of disrupted shipping. And, you know, what could be expected as the items disrupted and what kind of delays it would take as they run 3 weeks extra around the Cape of Good Hope. Now, in addition to that, as we go through tonight's program, what can you expect with the super freeze coming in? Now, the media is telling you finally, you know, I was 3 days ahead. All the models were 3 days ahead. If you were to go to Ryan Maue, forecaster site, or Joe Bastarde, another forecaster, you could have seen the model runs showing extreme cold coming in 3-4 days ago. So anyway, now it's all, you know, get ready for the super freeze, but they're not telling you behind that there's another 2 tongues of super freeze coming in, one after another after another. So where I am in East Tennessee, it's going to drop to probably 5 degrees Fahrenheit during this bout. But subsequently, you know, 4 or 5 days after that, it's going to drop to 10 degrees Fahrenheit. And then a few days after that, back to 10 degrees Fahrenheit. So we're going to see multiples of this. So Ransom, I got another, do me a microphone. This is choice A here. And if we move over to choice B, this is the USB. I don't see my audio moving. So let me go back to choice 1 here. So either or, I need a sound check because I'm flying blind. Can't hear a thing over here. That's what happens with new computers on the road. And as we look, everything that's occurring now was in motion to disrupt the supply chains anyway from 6 weeks, 8 weeks ago. Now we're coming, the chickens are coming home to roost. This is where it's really going to hit and get tight. So my focus was on farming supplies. What is not going to make it to the commercial farmer this year because of what we're seeing? Oh, and anyway, yeah, I got to add Rand here. My bad. Need to bring him on the call if I can here. What is going on with this thing? Excuse the technical difficulty. It's 4 a.m. for me here in Europe, but 3 a.m. to get the show on the road here. And as I'm moving through, I wanted to talk about the star forts and the different types of anomalies that I'm seeing in these star forts. It seems to be a cleansing, like a historical cleansing program throughout Europe with their pretty white sign after they've scraped away anything that has to show you the ancient history. They put up little facing stones on top of megalithic blocks so you don't see it. They're little hand-carved stones. They're cute. They're all the same size. While they're human workable, but you strip that facade away and you're looking at like 30, 40-ton blocks that are supposed to be moved by a couple of horses or something. So anyway, Ransom, I'm glad you're here with me. I see you online. And how's that sound check for me here?
You sound good. Sounds good.
All right. So you're looking at the Houthi thing. I think this is going to be a biggie myself. So, you know, I hold your breath. Here comes the big set, you know.
Can you hear me?
I can.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, I was telling my family that earlier when they started rumoring about bombing. I said, watch, they'll be bombing before it even hits the news feeds. And going through Twitter, that's pretty much how it was. So while the news feeds were saying developing, you could see stuff blowing up already. This is basically no surprise, right? We knew that they were going to expand the combat field, so to speak, the theater of war. I imagine that before it's over, within the next 10 years, you'll have the entire Middle East caught up in a conflict. And, for me and you, that means prices are going to skyrocket on everything. And I named tonight's program, how much control do they have over your reality? Because I was going through the headlines, and it's just, I'm not a super educated or smart guy. I'm self-educated for the most part. But when I start rolling through these articles and I know better, let's just look at the first falsity here. We all know that the planet is burning up right now from global warming. I mean, they beat it over our head. Climate change, man-made climate change, global warming, however they want to put it. And then you look at the news articles. U.S. beef output slides as blizzard disrupts Midwest meat plants. Well, it's the global warming goodness out there. And then you have 2024 NFL playoff weather. Dolphins at Chiefs could be the coldest game in history for both franchises. It's pretty cold out there. But all around, all I'm seeing is, I don't know, you call it fake news or the way that the world is being spun to you in the wrong way. But as far as the combat, and like we kind of predicted here on the show, that this was going to expand to the Americas, and that's exactly what we continue to see. I'm sure you saw Ecuador erupt in civil war there with the cartels attacking different places, police stations, prisons, jails. They even took over a TV station. Several people were executed. So this kind of thing. And then you got Venezuela continually threatening to incur and invade into their neighboring Guyana. And then you have the UK saying, hey, they won't let that happen. But, the UK is already tied up in the Middle East, and they're tied up in Europe. And it truly is coming together as a world war. So here's one article. Ecuadorian Americans say their families are trapped by fear as the country battles drug gangs. Gangsters parade and humiliated, at least the ones that they caught. And then you have, on the economic front, everybody's, excited about Argentina's new president, but yet their inflation is on par with Venezuela. Let's see here. What else we got? All the spying, but here's some more good ones. To prove that AI basically is just taking over. So I'm going to say within the next 5 years, everything that you see right in here will have a major AI hand in it, to the point where we will not be able to trust anything. And I put to you that it's already that way. I mean, the term Bidenomics, for example, right? But it's not just that. The whole world is entrenched in fakery. Over in China, they're building giant fake aircraft carriers, probably to bomb, but they can also hide what they're building from prying eyes in the same way by building fake things. And they're over there building a bunch of warships in the desert so they could blow them up. They have fake, stuff. It's kind of like World War II. You remember they had the inflatable tanks and trucks. They would deploy places. Stuff like that's happening. And here's another one that I just cannot believe on its face. I haven't even read the article, but I don't believe it's true just by the title. Big banks mole unthinkable. They want to sue the Fed. Now, I'm thinking that the big banks and the central banks and the Federal Reserve are the same entity, the same cartel. So the idea that they would sue themselves basically only means that what they're doing is to try to get new rules, regulations to their benefit. So I bet that this lawsuit does go somewhere, but it's only going to go somewhere in the way that they'll rewrite law in the benefit of the banks, which is the same thing as the Federal Reserve and the central banking cartel. And basically, that's what they have everybody is, the fake fight against each other, the fake civil war that they're trying to enact. And ironically, right now is one of the funniest things going on, I think, in our history of America. Here's one titled, Culture War Represents One of the Biggest Business Risks in 2024, and basically alluding to the fact that businesses are afraid to show their political opinions or their private opinions about anything in fear that they may be banned, boycotted, or something like that from both ends of the spectrum. But in the backdrop, our country is preparing for a world war, which means that they need cannon fodder and they need soldiers to fight that battle. Right now, the U.S. military is crying because not enough young white males are joining, which is funny because the last 10 years they spent their time beating over everyone's head how bad they were if they fell in that demographic. So they kind of got what they chose. And there's, comments all over Twitter. Why would I join a military that hates me? Why would I go fight for a country in a foreign banker war when that same country is vilifying me at home for nothing other than just being a Western person in a Western country? Because that's what it amounts to. They're using different kind of screws to turn into society in different places. And they use stereotypes, racism to create division and at the same time claim that the reason that they're dividing people is because of racism and inequality while they continue to create it using Marxist ideas. So you can see the entire right now it's really weird because you have Putin over there. And he's telling his people, you need to have babies, you need to grow food, you need to, shy away from civilization destroying behaviors and things like that. And then over here, we promote that idea. So in a sense, it's like World War II in reverse. Where the communist Marxist world government type people are actually the world powers on the Western, what we call Western civilization, which is really bizarre because the main power on the other side is also communist. So we're coming to a point that's so bizarre that no one's going to really know what's going on while things collapse. There's just too much confusion out there about what's reality, what's fact, what happened, what didn't happen. Take J6, for example, January 6th. What I thought on television was a provoked, milquetoast riot at best. Others are calling an insurrection. And in my view, we've only had 2 insurrections in this country. If you count the Civil War, possibly 3. We had the insurrection that created our country in the first place. We had the Civil War. We had an insurrection about ideas, and we settled that. And then there was the central banking cartel's corporate takeover of America being the last and most recent insurrection that's actually and factually happened. And now we're in a situation where, they're telling us, you're not going to have beef because it's too cold. At the same time, it's your fault for warming the globe up so much. So everything's a backwards idea. We have warmongers running for, president on both sides of the aisle, which is pretty bizarre because usually one side or the other kind of picks, at least on face, claiming that there would be less wars under them or whatever, but that doesn't seem to be what it is. And I recently went down again to El Paso to pick up relatives, where I got to up close look at the situation there. And it's just so spooky to drive by what is essentially, like I said before on this show, is a concentration camp. Now, the reason they're concentrating people in the camp may be different, but all of those powers that the government practices and uses and accumulates, they never give them up. So every one of these facilities that you see go up, it's never going to go down. Now, the purpose of what it does there may change. And there's actually articles out there right now questioning, are there enough quarantine camps set up right now for future problems? And you got to ask yourself, why is there, have you looked at television lately? If you have, you'd realize there's almost an absence of presidential ads. And the reason for that is, I don't know if it's just because there's an array of bums running for president or the fact that they're not really planning on having an election, or at least in the way that we think there is. There's any number of emergencies that could come up between now and then. And judging by different governors testing the waters, by taking constitutional rights away in the name of emergency powers or health crises. I have a feeling you're going to see that trend expand. And, what's going to happen when an excess of 40 million people are living in a country of about 350 million people when the resources run out? It doesn't look like it's going to be a very good scenario. And right now, we're already seeing in different parts in the country them starting to push the ideas that were in Europe about private ownership of land being used to board people from other places because they don't have any places to put them. You see the government subsidizing housing for them.
Cannot send me a message.
Yeah, so it's pretty weird, David. Also, you're not muted.
Oh, okay.
But yeah,
Thanks
it's looking crazy.
Yeah, it is. Speaking of that, in Europe being here right now, Germany is going to double its electricity price next month. So they were already at absurd levels anyway. So you talk about resources. Everything is everything is a resource-based import economy because Europe really doesn't do much of anything any longer. The United States, we still have some mining over there. We still have some oil extraction, processing. We have refineries. Europe doesn't have nearly the scale. And the political jellyfishness here also is unelected oligarchs running around telling countries what to do after they have their national election. Those people get in, and right away, you got to check out Poland because they don't like the politics. They had a vote of no confidence or remove the person who was on the side of what you consider common sense because they just didn't agree even with the election. So, they rolled back the clock here to serfdom. You still have the dukes and the earls and this sort of thing, but they're really at the very top levels again, unelected kings. And you look at this and like, I'm living in sort of a feudal Europe at the moment where people have cars, not horse wagons or oxen wagons. But the absurd prices anyway for things. Now, those of you following my journey here know that I am doing research on high tides through history and the different Liburnian society, which is the solar cult, and Palmanova and the different star forts, and all the way over to Venice and this whole Adriatic coast from Šibenik to Zadar and Split in Croatia. So these are all the oldest cities around here, if you will. Now, even in my own study walking around, I've seen where there's been deposition layers way inland on quote unquote the star forts. So as we look, is it a repeating pattern here of something with high tides that rolls inland and then rolls out again? Now, the reason I would kind of preface this, there's a couple things that are matching up with what Ransom just said. So Germany is going to have its power prices doubled next month, and they are already almost the highest in Europe. So how do you pay something that's double that's already incredibly expensive? Well, the disruption here with the Houthis, they are absolutely going to start sinking ships. Wait until, I've been doing a lot of following of all this on my Patreon channel, and it's mainly what I focus on is the ancient history, what I'm finding in my travels over here. Also, because it's so close, what's going on with the shipping routes and how's that being affected directly to Europe by having to go 3 weeks around, because it's not affecting the United States so much as it is here. It's almost an instant hit. So, for example, everything, and this is going to blow everybody's mind. Croatia used to be one of the cheapest countries in Europe to travel. So it was in 2023, they moved to the euro. But as of January 1st of this year, 2024, they stopped using their old nationally issued currency called the kuna. Everything went up in price, doubling, some places tripling, some place 2.5%. It is actually more expensive to travel in Croatia than it is in Italy. Italy is far cheaper to travel than it is in Croatia right now. That is a mind blower. Not only from the simple cafe or espresso or macchiato, whatever you're ordering, at 25 to 30%, easily cheaper 30% in Italy. Hotels are cheaper. Unbelievable. SIM cards are cheaper, which makes no sense. But to have these prices roll through, like they're going to double the production or double the electrical price. Everything over in Croatia doubled in price. So then you start talking about all these economic hits that are going on, and it won't be too long until this inflation wave hits the United States. Like you pretty much summed up the sociological and sort of the governmental end of the changes that we see that are scripted, planned to move this reset further down into the next checkerboard, square, or chess piece board. But focusing on the economic and then the food, this is where they're going to get people a lot. So I have two charts in front of me here because it dovetails into your bank. Why are people, what's this whole thing with suing the bank? Well, if you've been anybody out there listening to Dr. Jim Willie, know that currently there's a huge amount of our treasury bill issuance that is not sold every single time. So what the banks, Ransom, you're talking about, they're dealer banks. Like JP Morgan is one of those. If there's non-issuance, then the banks are required to buy all that issuance back from the U.S. government as a guarantor. Now, through the last 30, 40 years, it's been 100% sales. So for them, it was just easy money, and there was nothing to even think about. They sold 100% of the time. Well, now they're not selling 60%, which means these banks you just referenced need to absorb the losses off of the billions in issuance. So let's say they issue $10 billion and only $4 billion of it sells. And it's always super short. Now, this is another thing that transitioned or changed. You know, before we had 15-year and 30-year treasury bills that everybody in the world would gobble up because it was a tier one asset. I mean, it was tradable for cash, like almost like a bearer bond. You walk in and want the cash for this, it was instantly redeemable. Well, now gold is, with Basel III, that same thing. Gold is instantly redeemable for fiat on an international market. So 60% of our bonds are not selling now. So let's go back to the 10 billion issuance. That means that our banks now are stuck buying up $6 billion of treasury bonds that nobody else wants at a 1 year, a 2 year, or a 3 year. A 5 is even a stretch now because this is the thing. Nobody believes in the power of the U.S. government's ability to control the economy with that much money printing. So if they are buying, they're like, yep, we'll buy it, but 12 months, bro, that's all you get. We want our money in and out lightning fast. Comparatively to, like I said, 30 years used to be the normal 15-year, 10-year bonds. So I think it has something to do with these dealers, i.e. the big banks, JP Morgan. I think Bank of America is involved in that, but don't quote me on that. I know Goldman Sachs is also another dealer. So they're all taking these massive hits. Well, you're right. Legislation is going to have to change where they're going to try to do a force majeure and absolve themselves from having to purchase this, I don't know, what do you call it? Like I heard it termed toxic paper back in 2008, and that's kind of the best I can give for you. But never mind the war bond issuance. This is a way to get the American savers back in. So we're going to revert back to World War II. You know, think about that. If there is a war and America gets involved much more deeply, it's almost guaranteed those bonds are going to sell as a safe haven for some assets because a wartime economy means so much extra money out there, just like an incredible tidal wave of money will be out for the war effort. So it means a booming economy, a wartime economy. Now, this one might be different, but in general, wartime economies are massive GDP increasers. So, you know, you start to wrap all these things together, and I'm wondering if those banks are suing to get out of their liability to continue to buy these, you know, underwater bonds already and somehow reposition themselves to be able to be the war bond issuer or the war bond, dealer outside of the regular treasury bill. You know, you're talking about two different animals. A war bond issuance is A, and the regular 1 year, 2 year, 3 year treasury bills, that's B. And then, this chart I have here comes off of Zero Hedge, one of them, and the other is, where's this one coming off of here? This was the Philadelphia Federal Reserve. I have to mark this better. So the Philadelphia Federal Reserve put out their new chart today of 30, 60, and 90-day past due balances on credit cards. So you see 2021, the past due generally on a 30-day where you couldn't make this is just making your minimum payment. It's not paying it off or anything. It's just making your minimal payment of like $12 or $50 or whatever you're at as your minimum. It was only 1.5% in 2021. Now it's like 3.2%. So that literally has doubled the amount of people that cannot pay their minimum balance in 30 days. And it very much follows the same trajectory with the 60-day balance. Back in 2021 was 1%. Now it's 2.3%. And if you look at the 90-day past due balance, where people are 90 days and they still can't get it enough together to even pay the minimum balance after 90 days, that moved from 0.6% way back in, not even 1%, back in 2001, all the way to 1.5%. So if this is the struggle in America for people to not even be able to pay the minimum, and we're sitting at these rates, everything has doubled the amount of people that can't even pay their minimum balance after 1 or 2 or 3 months. Now you need to reckon with the wrecking ball here, this very large crude carrier. And you're going to start to hear this. So everybody out there, new lexicon, which you will know as much as social distancing. This is going to be very large crude carriers, VLCC class of ships. This is the thing that moves oil around the world. Crude carriers, or VLCC, when you see it in the news, their rates have just gone off the Richter. I mean, I'm looking at this. It's a vertical rise like a Loch Ness monster in terms of like what the rates are here. Before you were looking at what, 15, around 1,000. And this is a different scale. It's not in U.S. dollars. It's on their own shipping scale. So we're going to use 1,000 as the normal on this, and it's jumped to 4,178. So a 4x increase on moving your oil across the planet. And that would be the very same thing with container shipping as well, because people are paying extra rates to go around the Cape of Good Hope. So everything that you're going to be getting from this point forward is going to be 4 times more expensive on the shipping. Plus, you're not going to have the availability or the supply choices that you used to have. So these are all going to march in tandem along with the rest of this reset here. And, Ransom, you did hit it on the head. I really, really think these banks are suing to absolve themselves from the Treasury bill liability. But please remember, everybody, if you have any money in the bank, you are the unsecured creditor. The minute you deposit your money into an American bank, you don't own your money. The bank does. They can choose to give it back to you. Now, that was passed in 2008 with the Dodd-Frank Act as a rider on top of a rider on top of a rider. So remember 2008, well, those, they come up, and I even forget the players, the talking heads names change so quickly. They can bail you in. And The Great Taking, that new movie, Todd, if you've watched the movie, I encourage everybody to watch it. The new updated terms that were updated in 2010, then 2012, then 2016 allow for banks to now bail in your mortgage to help the banks sustain any kind of losses or collapse, meaning that they can pull your mortgage even though you have you don't have a variable rate mortgage, but you have a mortgage with a large institution. They can bail that in and say, we own that house now as collateral to stop the bank run and to stop the bank collapse. We are going to reissue that mortgage, or they will not reissue it, and they will just take the house and it will be bundled into a package, and somebody like BlackRock will come along and buy the package, and they will legally have the right to evict you from your home, even though you paid all the way down, and it was your very last one payment before you own your home, they still have the legal right to bail in your house with all equity into it, all payments you've done so far, take ownership of the house, and decide whether to rent it back to you, refinance you in the new system at the new rate, or just evict you out of the home. And, some people were saying there'll be too many homes at that point, so they'll bulldoze a lot of homes to create a false scarcity to then drive up the rental prices again. So now put all these pieces together, and this is where we kind of sit. Now, the linchpin for it all would be stopping global shipping and global oil supplies. So far they've done a good job of knocking down the shipping. The Suez Canal's closed, the Panama Canal's closed. Very few ships going through either. They got to go around Africa. Now these freighter rates or, any kind of rate for shipping's 4 times more expensive. That cost is going to go on to you. And another thing I've been reading, one last point here, Ransom, I know I'm rambling, but the feeder routes. So a feeder is a smaller ship. So a feeder would be something that would maybe come out of Myanmar and then hook up and be transshipped onto a larger vessel further afield. Smaller vessels coming out of, say, Malaysia that will go down to Singapore, and then like an OCC freighter will pick it up coming out of Hong Kong. Those feeders are now completely in disarray of missing all of their deliveries, because those things are sailing or coming into berth 3 weeks late or more. So the feeders are sitting there going, wait a minute, we have this set of, we got 50 containers to put on your 10,000 container vessel, but you have already sailed, or you're coming in 12 days later than planned, and we can't sit around here. We need to go pick up stuff and run it upriver in our own countries. So what do? And, a lot of this stuff's perishables. It's in reefers, which is refrigerated containers, a lot of this stuff. So your frozen goods, packed feed or food stuffs, just a lot of things that you would consider normals that were easy to get. Walmart, you're going to start watching stuff just empty off the shelves here. The biggest thing is the feeder routes are still disrupted to this point as of today, where they still can't, even with AI, smooth out the feeder routes to fill these larger container ships moving across the ocean. So some of these container ships are going 50% full when they should be 100% full. So, again, you're going to have to start, raising rates to cover only half full voyage across the ocean. Or you wait, and then, everything else gets disrupted because you're waiting for an additional 3 weeks. Now it's 6 weeks behind versus 3 weeks behind. So this is the kind of supply-driven and, I guess, inflation, non-availability shock coming to a neighborhood near you. Now wrap up what Ransom just said in the geopolitics in the society, and then wrap in this economy. And then where does it ultimately lead for food? That is the question, because all the disruption we're seeing in this Yemen thing, damn, it's going to intensify. They already said they're going to start hitting anything and everything with hypersonic missiles from this point. So you're going to watch things sinking out in the Red Sea, and that's going to disrupt. So imagine if there's a permanent sinking of some very, very large carriers out there that at some point block off those sea lanes until marine salvage can get in and remove like 1,000-foot tanker off the bottom. For those of you who don't get that, what I mean is you got these two areas. The Red Sea going in is less than 200 feet deep. Going into the Straits of Hormuz, that pinch point there off of Oman going in around Iran there, that's only 240 feet deep. So you sink a carrier or you sink one of these very large oil carriers in there, their hulls will be out of the water because some of these ships are 1,000 feet long, even longer. So unless they sink perfectly in the channel, still their antenna and radar gear and a lot of these extra, riggings, et cetera, are going to be sticking out of the water. And ships just won't be able to pass through there. They're going to clog up literally clog up the waterway. So apparently, since, the U.S. and England and Canada and Netherlands decided to go in and do that and bomb the Houthis, Their response is going to be launching missiles to now sink ships, not take them hostage any longer. Their gameplay has changed to they are going to start sinking anything they can left, right, and center. So this will be a game changer. And Ransom, I'm curious where you think that'll go. Taking hostage ships, piracy, whatever, versus just straight out sinking ships on the military side of things. Like, what kind of anti-uppage do you think this will bring into the whole world's supply shocks at that point?
I actually think it's going to end up being worse than just dealing with the people in the Middle East and the straits there. Like we talked about last year, if tensions increase between us and China, or any of the countries that are now dealing with China that used to deal with the United States change their mind, there's so many different things. You have North Korea, you have Taiwan, you have Japan building their military again. So it's not too far-fetched to see that there will be shipping problems all through the Pacific, all the way over to Central America, Mexico, and South America having problems now that are beginning up there, and then also the Middle East and Europe. So that's basically the worldwide shipping network, all having localized problems. And, for years and years, the U.S. and others, for the most part, basically ignored piracy in North Africa and, the east side of Africa there by the Middle East. They just kind of ignored it. I mean, they dealt with it. And I think you're right. What's going on is a planned escalation of all things. It's a tit for tat chess game that they're playing with the public. And I could just see like some of the things that we're talking about kind of unfold whenever they mention them. So, you're talking about that, the trade and how that'll affect food later. It's going to be more than food. It'll be all products that come from overseas or anywhere, which means that if you live in a country like we do that no longer produces its own things, there lies a problem immediately with the supply and demand. But let's go through like what's going on out there. You have all of this more destabilization. And we know what happened last time major destabilization happened in the Middle East. We had, whether they're proxy players or proxy groups or not, it doesn't really matter when the outcome is basically terrorism. So it doesn't matter which group is doing it. But here's an article right here. Death cults return. ISIS is plotting to exploit Mideast chaos to make blood-soaked comeback after killing 100 in Iran bomb attack. And then, like I said, the news is a little bit late. This is a two hours ago, and it's talking about they're expected to launch strikes against the Houthis. However, they were already bombing at the same time as this article came out. Here's some weird stuff, too. This is kind of a sidetrack. I just reminded me. Giant predator worm that ruled ancient oceans discovered in Greenland. I wonder why that is. Maybe because things might be getting colder. But just, kind of to throw this back in there again, nothing that you're reading is true. It's all BS. And part of what the BS is kind of what I was talking about before when I've mentioned that, there was talk that the royal family was going to recede back and abdicate the throne. Now, that might not happen now that there's a new king in town. However, most of the other groups that you probably spent the last 10 or 20 years, not you personally, but everybody out there has been researching these secret societies, these secret groups. And like we've mentioned before, if you go back to let's say 2010, almost no one knew who Bilderberg Group was. Now everybody knows who the Bilderberg Group is. They know about the organization, the side organization from them, Davos, and now we know about the World Economic Forum. So basically my point is all of these secret societies and real rulers of the planet that are in the shadows, they're going back in the shadows because now the public knows about them. And this article right here is kind of proof to me that that's what's going on. So Skull and Bones is now worried about equity and inclusion. So a secret society that's invite only, that has all of these secrets going on. According to this article, up in their little circle where they go initiate people, they have all of these paintings of prior presidents, and statesmen or other people of importance, supposedly, like John Kerry when he ran for president against George Bush there the second time. When you're looking at two people from the same secret organization, right? But now it's not secret. So what they're talking about is they're trying to convince the public that, they're not a bunch of crazy old family Illuminati type people in a secret society. No. They're going to remove all of the old paintings of the people because they were white males, and remove that so that they can show that their group is now about equity and inclusion. So obviously, on its face value, that's talking about getting rid of or covering up their past, because when you know who those paintings are, you know what they did, what programs they made, etc. So what they're doing right now, and I kind of brought this up when we were talking about when they pulled down the Albert Pike statue from DC, that the kind of Masonic type secret societies have obviously given the go-ahead for a retransformation into a more Marxist Western world. And they're just showing that right now. Like here's one. The WHO's managerial, if I could talk, managerial Gambit. And basically this article is talking about no matter what country you live in or what's going on, that they have world governance in your local area, so that they could start doing things like, demanding that you do certain things in your local area. The WHO's Gambit, local officials can enforce biomedical tyranny. Now, why do we care about that? Well, from recent years, you could tell that no one really knows what's going on because of all the conflicting reports, information, and facts. Do you believe this article from the Washington Post that says 10,000 people are dying every month during this holiday-fueled spread of, I don't know if we could say it. And then here's another article. Cancer is striking more people, and doctors are completely alarmed and baffled because they just don't understand why. And like I've said for years, no one ever looks for the cause of cancer. We just need to find the cure. Here's some more gaslighting, no pun intended. Hertz is selling 20,000 electric vehicles. You know why? Because they don't work, and they're buying gasoline cars. So when you see tweets out from the president and his wife talking about everybody's going electric, they're lying. It's all made up. It's all nonsense. And then here we get to the meat of it. If we actually have a hit or some kind of dollar destabilization, what's going to happen to our public? According to this article, the rich now own a record share of stocks. Percentages of U.S. households and equity and mutual fund shares owned by the wealthiest 10% of the population. So if you get hit, you're just a little guy. So you're the little guy is like less than 10% of the stock market. So when everything gets hit, the little guys all go broke. They lose everything. But these big players that own 90% of it, that are backed up by banks and all of these other things, they really can take the hit. It's not going to hurt them. So they're okay with the markets crashing because they know when it gets built back up, their percentage of wealth will increase and the new monetary value of things will maintain their wealth, but not everyone else's. And this is kind of the way of everything. So, and I kind of wanted to get back into what we talked about last week when we talked about AI running everything, because this all fits together, in my opinion. You brought up the great taking, which is, really how the ownership of private property is going to systematically and necessarily disappear over time because of banks, realtor, different stuff where all of the private property is owned by some kind of company and not a person. That's not just true for houses. That's going to be true for businesses. And you can already see what that world looks like by going back to 2020, when all of the moms and pops and private ownership of, like, say, 500 or less employees were forced to close down. Meanwhile, all of the mega billionaires companies stayed open and allowed you to continually give them money because you had only one option to give that money to. And I have a feeling banking, real estate, and everything else is going to go that way. And when that happens, you won't be able to complain to anyone, because every office, every government office, every company's office, every office period will be ran by some kind of AI where you can't get to anyone or blame anyone. And this is going to be true for everything. And we're already seeing the fast food industry now changing over to AI. That means that no more entry-level workers. And then on top of that, you also have all of these companies cutting their hours down to a minimum amount of hours so that no American worker can get full-time hours, which means the companies don't have to pay benefits to those workers. They never achieved 40 hours, so technically they're not full-time employees. And then why not replace them with robots, right? And they're going to use this excuse of violence and flash mobs and homeless and drug addicts and et cetera, running the streets, and they can't do business because it's not safe for them. So they're going to have to change over to an AI system in which you're probably only going to see 1 or 2 humans around, and those will be the people hired for security or law enforcement to protect the robotic investment and the food distribution centers. So here's this article from the New York Post. Owner of LA bakery targeted by mob of 100 looters, angered at rampant street takeover. Nobody gets punished for anything, and indeed that's the plan. Why? So they can open up stuff like this. Robots and AI-powered new fully automated burger restaurant, Cali Express. And that's an old one. And then as we talked about last week, McDonald's opened up their first fully automated AI restaurant in Texas. No cook, no salesman, no window person, nobody. So what does that mean? Necessarily, that means no longer dining in a place, no longer being around people. And there's no one to complain to, if you got wronged in some way. You'll have a computer screen, a kiosk to try to navigate. And we all know, if you've ever had a problem with customer service and you've called a company, you get customer service when you talk to a human being. You do not get it when you have to talk to an AI and go through endless circles of punching in numbers and then being hung up on because of bad connections, which I think is all a manufactured plan to end the idea for people to just quit trying to get customer service altogether. And then let's move to the fake narration that we're going to go into a civil war. And I don't mean fake as far as it might not happen. I mean fake that as far as it will never be a grassroots civil war in our country. They've tried it in so many ways over and over and over again. But now they're trying to pass bills that will ban militias. Now, think about this for just 1 second. At the same time that our military is dying to have new recruits, and they're really they're having trouble bringing it in. They're pushing bizarre stuff out to the public that makes them not want to join. And then they're pushing narratives where they get to call American citizens insurgents. And then in the backdrop, while everybody's worried about the Epstein non-list, they're trying to pass bills banning militias, banning private ownership of different things, which, of course, in the end, you know where that goes. It's trying to disarm the public. And then you have this. Here's I can't show it because it's not my footage, but insane footage. Journalist sneaks into New York City migrant centers, exposing the border crisis. Now, like I said, I just got to look at this giant thing of people that are going to be needy. They're not so much needy now, evidently. I mean, they had enough resources to make it, half the planet up here, and it's not just from the south of us. There are thousands of Chinese nationals coming across, thousands of people from the Middle East, thousands of people from Africa, and these thousands start adding up into the millions. Now, I know that we were estimating illegals in between 11 and 20 million sometime around 2010. Now, admittedly, we've allowed another additional 20 million to come into the country. Some numbers are different. But now that we're reaching the point of 400 million people with approximately, I'm going to say 50 million. I'm going to go ahead and bump it up because it's continually to happen. So it's not over yet, and there's no sign of it ending. So 50 million more people. Now, add in the amount of people that are already on disability, the people that are taking Social Security, the people that are on assistance for food and housing and et cetera. And it quickly is abundantly clear that there will not be enough resources to go around for all people. California just passed a bill giving free health care to people from all over the world. Everywhere are passing legislation to allow people from other places to vote in local elections, which, as you know, a local election helps with the state election, which, helps choose what's going to happen on the national level in theory. But if you get local areas that no longer are beholden to the taxpayers, and then on top of that, there are very few taxpayers left, obviously with a nation that is so far in debt, what are we, 33, 34 trillion in debt right now? So we have to either convert over to a world government and get rid of the monetary systems, reset, or they're just going to let everything burn down and continue. And I think that both of those things are really the same goal, because they're trying to get rid of people. That's the bottom line. And they're moving them around the planet to be in the worst positions possible for whatever this upcoming event is going to be, whether it be World War III, maybe this solar step down of the sun. It might get cold. I think solar max is over this time, but how close are we actually going into the grand solar minimum? How likely is it that temperatures will slightly increase over decades to come? And they know that. And they also know that they are pushing programs to block out the sun. So whenever your crops stop growing, or whenever people are starting to starve because there's less sunlight and less food being grown worldwide, not just in your local area, but worldwide, that starts to take effect. But don't worry, they have these programs. Look, Bill Gates, I've been blocking the sun. I saved you from global warming. Don't worry about it. Eat this GMO food that we're making. And then think about this, and I've mentioned this a couple of shows ago, and it's looking more and more like it's going to be the case, is they're going to end private travel between countries as far as you get on an airliner and you just go. It seems like they're not upgrading their planes. They're not maintaining them right. So something is wrong with the whole airline industry, and it seems like they're willing to also let that burn so that they could reset it. And I don't know if you saw that, but part of the plane blew out of this Boeing when it was coming from Alaska, and they had to land. So now they're getting rid of the other planes or grounding them. And I was looking this morning, there was 130 flights canceled so that they could check out the planes and stuff. So things are getting crazy. And and I know that if gas goes to a certain point, people are not going to be traveling. They're only going to be working with that gas, and then they're only going to be using that gas to go to the grocery store. And if it's true, like it seems to be, that they're going to keep pushing this narrative of different ecological and natural there's where they get you. It's natural disasters caused by man-made natural disasters that will affect your food. I guarantee you there'll be about 5 articles out this week explaining why the coldest part of the year right now, where we're about to get some extreme temperatures, maybe even record-breaking cold in the next several months, they're going to blame that on man-made global warming. And then they're going to say, well, there's no meat at the store because, there was the weather because of the climate change. And by the way, you should ration anyway because you have too much privilege, and we need your children to go to war for us because nobody wants to fight our banker wars anymore. So that means to me that with all things considered, they need a major event to reset not only the propaganda, but they need to reset the mind frame of the public. And it's very easy to do that because you remember after 9/11, everybody was real patriotic for a minute, and then they started realizing something was wrong with what was going on. And then we had some of the biggest anti-war protests ever. And, then we switch to the first black president. You're distracted by that for a while. And then we switch to Trump. And then there's all this drama of, Russiagate and all of these other things that seem to be all propaganda made up just to distract you. Meanwhile, they've been setting the stage for the next major world war. And it's all up in your face. The problem they're having is that the public is no longer buying enough of what they're putting out. So they need to reset desperately, and I mean in the short term. So I'm expecting something big to happen in 2024 Never forget 2024. I don't know what it is, but it's going to be so out there that it's going to fundamentally change the way you think the world works. And that is the ultimate goal.
And while you were talking about that, Ransom, I went to the U.S. debt clock. We are at 34 trillion, 27 billion, and counting by the second. So that debt per citizen is $101,283. Whether you're working or not working, that's just an average. This thing is clipping along at nearly $1 trillion a month now. So at the rate it's moving, as the 12th of the month, I would anticipate this thing creeping up toward 35 trillion by the end of the month. At what point do we start rolling off $1 trillion a month, and then the interest payments are $1 trillion? So you can see why there needs to be a war bond issuance. We'll talk about that when we come back. Plus, I wanted to hit the record cold that's coming in so you can protect your animals.
Sacred and objects fashioned from it were a means of connecting with a supernatural world. Far from passive deposits of wealth, gold was sacred. It was greatly prized in cult. Objects made of gold were active agents in an ongoing engagement with powerful forces. The Inca used gold to make ritual objects, combinations of gold and silver and gold and copper called tumbaga. Wearing gold jewelry was a sign of a person's wealth and power. For the Inca, gold was also the blood of Viracocha, their sun god. For the Mayan people and many others in ancient America, gold was part of a complex symbolic system. Gold is mentioned in Greek mythology for examples as varied as King Midas, the golden fleece stolen by Jason, who possessed the power of resurrection, through to the golden apples of Hesperides. The golden apples were guarded by the 100-headed dragon Ladon. The dragon conferred immortality on whoever ate them. Over the past 5,000 years, from the Egyptian pharaohs and the merchants of 14th century Venice to world governments in the space age, man has treasured gold for its utility and value during times of both prosperity and disparity. Through the rise and fall of great dynasties and civilizations, gold has maintained its purchasing power as a reliable store of value for millennia. Gold has been used as money since 560 BC, when King Croesus of Lydia created a gold coin in his own image. Ever since, it has continued to increase its long-term value and remains the world's most universally accepted form of money. Today, the demand for gold continues to flourish globally. History proves that fiat paper money is designed to go to zero through inflation, whereas gold has intrinsic value in which it maintains forever. Paper money is a debt instrument. Gold is an asset of wealth in its own right. It does not depend upon any governments, corporations, or individuals' promise to repay. ITM Trading has spent the last 27 plus years developing a team of expert researchers and analysts to make this possible. Simply put, we build strategies which are historically proven to protect your wealth and assets through any economic downturn or currency collapse. Schedule your free gold and silver strategy call 866-834-1422. That's 866-834-1422. Or go to learn.itmtrading.com/MIAC and keep watching Mountain High Time and Mini Ice Age Conversations if you know what's good for you.
Releasing the show notes from our programs, just bullet point list of what we talked about so you can start the conversation with others or do a deep dive in your own research. Head over to oilseedcrops.org. In the nav bar, you'll see MIAC radio show. Click there, put your email, and we'll get that out to you on a weekly.
And welcome back for the second hour of Mini Ice Age Conversations. David DuByne right along here with Ransom Godwin taking you through this second hour. And it is going to be a barn burner here. So those of you who are looking for broken pipes, power outages, this message is for you. And again, thank you, Revolution Radio, for allowing us to speak unhindered here. That first hour was definitely a summation of the world, but a lot of people think that that needs to be combated. I just saw the new list of World Economic Forum talking points or indicators that need to be tackled this year. And right at number one, misinformation and disinformation. Now, I get it if it's purposeful, like yelling fire in a theater. I get it. That definitely is going to cause a panic. But to have a different alternative to interpret the events of the world being scripted and not real, to direct a populace or a global agenda to carbon taxes, for example, that firmly needs to be discussed out in the open. But that would be considered disinformation because, well, you didn't believe the scientists that say in the middle of this warm period between glacial periods that it's the warmest ever between the glacial periods. And that's what I keep getting at is it doesn't matter what we do. We're going back into a glacial period. We're at the end of this interglacial. So whatever happens, it all makes zero. Who cares anyway? We're stepping down into the next glaciation period. So this might be part of the mix-ups in the weather that we're seeing. Now, is it going to step down into a glacial period like next week? No, absolutely not. But if you look at it, we are at the very end of this warm period. So to blame humans for this, that, or the other, it really doesn't matter. The Earth is going to get resculpted anyway by miles of ice based on the last, 21 million years of looking at the Earth's climate. Every 100,000 years, we get this ice era, and we are stepping into another ice era. So we'll see a warm period again in 90,000 years. Earth's going to resculpt itself anyway. So you're looking at these massive changes where the Earth is covered in ice, and then they're trying to blame you for doing something. But wait, what about all the ice that's coming back? Anyway, it's a distraction. So I'm glad we can talk about it unhindered here, Revolution Radio. If you consider free speech something is valuable, please consider donation. You can find many ways to donate. And I see that they got their QR codes now for crypto. Speaking of which, I can't believe the SEC, that's the Securities and Exchange Commission for the U.S. government, was hacked on their Twitter account. Then somebody posted that said, hey, the Bitcoin ETF is approved. And then they pulled it back and said, no, it's not approved. Somebody hacked our account. And then a day later, they're like, yes, it's approved. So that's some weirdness in itself. Remember those same people, like, who was that? JP Morgan, Jamie Dimon was saying, it's such a scam, we got to outlaw it. Well, now JP Morgan is going to be one of the broker dealers responsible for clearing on the Bitcoin transactions for the new ETF for Bitcoin. So, you look at this whole charade of the way it's been. So if I would have said something like, Jamie Dimon is lying through his teeth because they are planning to start Bitcoin ETFs and control the Bitcoin industry through fictitious paper issuance, that would have been earmarked from the World Economic Forum as disinformation 2 years ago. But now we sit where JP Morgan, Jamie Dimon are going to be in control as a broker-dealer clearinghouse for the Bitcoin on the ETF. So, what they're trying to say is you can't talk about anything unless it's an approved narrative, and you can talk about the approved narrative 100% to what we said in the script. But if you go off script and you make your own idea of what might be happening, that is verboten, as they would say. But again, keeping free speech channels online so we can still discuss this is of utmost importance. Now, I had something for you, Ransom, there before the break. Spain's severe drought is crushing their olive oil production. No pun intended on the crush there. But the extra virgin olive oil, for any of you who like that in America, is this is on the doubling on the wholesale rate. So If you enjoy Spanish extra virgin olive oil, that will probably, by the time it reaches your shores or our shores there, will be another 50 to 100% more expensive if you're going to buy that. So you can start to see how everything is just going to get pushed, because a lot of people use olive oil as medicine. A lot of people prefer it for cooking or, healthier alternative than like canola oil. So what happens when things like this as healthy alternatives suddenly disappear? Like, what's our next healthy oil that we produce in the United States? Because it sure isn't canola, and it sure isn't corn oil, and all these kind of mixed vegetable oils. It's not that. Avocado oil, perhaps. But when you look at it, a lot of these things that we need for our own health and well-being are not coming from the United States. So a massive disruption somewhere is going to cause huge, and I'll say it again, huge problems. So for the first minute here, let me riff on this. The electric cars, if you have an electric car with the record cold inbound in on this event here right now, by Tuesday of next week, you're going to be like, what? How can I get that cold across the entire United States? So today is the 12th. Will be in a couple hours, depending on where you are on the planet. And I'm on Tropical Tidbits if anybody wants to follow along. TropicalTidbits.com analysis models. And you just go into the thermodynamics, which means temperature, big word to say temperature. And when we look out, let's see here. The 14th, chilly. A lot of temperatures are going to be around 0 or 4 degrees. It looks like those are going to be some of the top daytime temperatures. We're talking daytime highs of like 4 Fahrenheit. But where it gets really chilly and kind of nasty is, let me see here, the 15th and 16th, which is like Monday and Tuesday. They're looking at about 4 degrees Fahrenheit in places like northern Texas. But where it gets a little interesting for me is running the model out here. They're looking at 19 degrees Fahrenheit down on the coast in the Gulf of Mexico in Alabama. They're looking at 19 degrees Fahrenheit in New Orleans in Louisiana. 21 degrees Fahrenheit in the panhandle of Florida. And then that cold, ripping cold, dips way down into Mexico, where it's still just 25 degrees Fahrenheit down into Mexico. Now that periphery, it includes, as I'm looking at the map here in blue, and if you take it, you're looking at January 17th, which is Wednesday. You're looking at that model out that far. This is regular ground temperatures. Last time the power went out with ERCOT, that was only a third of the United States that was cold. And that was enough to trip everything because there was such the draw in Texas and others in periphery areas like Louisiana. Looks like Arkansas is going to be at 0 degrees or 3 degrees Fahrenheit. Kansas looks like 1 degree Fahrenheit. And even if you move all the way out through places like where you live, Ransom, in the Four Corners area, it's looking like 4 degrees, New Mexico. And then you get over places like Tennessee, it's going to be 3 degrees. Northern Georgia, 8 degrees. South Carolina, 19 degrees. So put it in perspective, last time the power tripped off and had all those rolling brownouts across the eastern part of the United States and central U.S., only a third of the country was cold. This time, the entire nation is at some sub-zero temperatures or barely above that. So the power draw is going to be a record power draw for sure. Now, whether it's going to be record cold, it will be in many, 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 many locations. Others, it will be just scraping a degree or above the record. But the one thing to contend with and understand about this whole event here is the amount of power that will be needed or drawn off the grid is absolutely going to cascade the entire U.S. grid into rolling brownouts / blackouts. And I had some numbers here for you. So looking at ERCOT this time, Their max generation power during the last event, which was 2022, where the power had failed, they generated 66 gigawatts. That's the most ever generated for that Texas power grid area called ERCOT, E-R-C-O-T. 66 gigawatts was the maximum they've ever produced. The anticipated draw from ERCOT this storm, because it's so all-encompassing east and west and north and south, is going to be 80 gigawatts. And that is just for one single grid operator. Now, heaven forbid, in the TVA, those morons have been reducing gas and coal thermal production of electricity 1.5% per year and replacing it with solar panels and wind, which is not very efficient in Tennessee. I tell you, it's like a white elephant waste of money ESG project. So anyway, our non-reliable power is now making up more and more of the grid. So during the same time that ERCOT tripped off, they were trying to pull power from everywhere they could, including the TVA, because I was in Tennessee during the event. Our power kept going on and off for 3 days. And it would come on for 3 hours, and then it would go off for 2 hours, and it would come on for 3 hours, and it would go off for 3 hours, and it would come back on for 4 hours, and then it would go off for 2 hours. But there was no real schedule to it, you know. But I always had the generator out and ready, so vroom, and, you know, if you're using a generator, ventilation, you are going to suffocate if you don't have ventilation. So please, number one priority, and please don't ventilate into the garage where your dogs are. You need to ventilate outside with extension cords. So think about that. TVA has reduced 3% more of reliable production into non-reliable wind and solar during this event. So the power grid in Tennessee is going to trip off into blackouts 3% sooner than it did 2 years ago during the last event. So we're looking at multiple cascades of power not available. And again, these are some of the coldest temperatures ever recorded in these areas for this time of the year. Now, if it was, you know, going on at the end of January into February with the coldest month of the year, okay. But this is like, you know, about 3 weeks earlier than the coldest period that we sit and we snap into the first couple of weeks of February. So the draw on the grid is going to be massive. And, you know, we've all read this book, and I'm trying to get your ideas here, Ransom, on this dark winter script. Now, I talked to Eric Gajewski, or he sent me a message. He says the dark winter script, there's not enough things that seem to be lining up for it, as in terms of the book, the script itself, to run out into this prolonged power outage across the United States for weeks or months. But he believes it might be a test run to trip the grid in many a place and just continually roll blackouts and brownouts. Okay, so this will all beginning on the 17th, and then as we move forward in the model run, the cold's going to be right back on January 20th again. They're showing like 4 or 5 degrees in Arkansas again, showing like 7 degrees in Tennessee again. This time it's only going to be 24 degrees in New Orleans, not 19 degrees. So it's about 5 degrees warmer there. Please remember, they don't have insulation in their homes. There's going to be so many busted pipes, so many just incredible infrastructure damage from the cold on this time. And then roll the model out a little further, and we're looking at the 22nd. That cold really just smashes the eastern United States from like Tennessee north up through Virginia all the way up to Canada. And then the models are showing that there's another cold wave coming in February, which is far colder than this one. But the model only goes out for me to, let's say, January 27th. But the temperatures in the late January, first week of February are going to be colder than this record cold outbreak with the biggest amount of draw on the grids ever. So, like, summing all that up, Ransom, you know, you heard about this dark winter script thing. You got any comments on that for me, or any ideas to add into like what we could expect during this time with so much additional power that won't be there, but will be needed, but won't be available because of this new ESG and replacement of non-reliable power? What do you think is going to happen, and how will people react is more the question.
I kind of think, you know, we've seen the script before. I don't know about the it being a total dark winter. But like we've said on the show many times, matter of fact, a couple of times we talked about the need of preparation for just things that are going to happen: hurricanes, tornadoes, blizzards, etc. And right after, a couple of times we talked about it, that exact thing happened where lots of people were out. I think what's going to happen is you're going to see a lot of people die from the cold. Elderly people that can't afford to heat or are trying to save money, and they always, a lot of times, a lot of people underestimate the danger of hypothermia and not being warm enough. But then also you have a bunch of people from traditionally warm areas of the planet who are newly arrived here that are dealing with homeless conditions in certain places. And think about this. What do you think would happen if thousands of homeless people died, and a lot of those homeless are veterans? And then you look on the news and you see, 10,000 people living at the Marriott and, a bunch of different hotels. They see schools being closed down where, even though you're paying your tax dollars for your children to go to school, they're going to close that down and house people. Now, I'm not against, obviously, helping people in times of need, but it's a designed drain on the system. That's what I was kind of talking about. And the thing with Texas, there's no way that they don't know how much energy that they're going to need ahead of time because they have the same kind of models and different stuff that everyone else has. So the fact that they went out or ran out of power last time was kind of fishy, in my opinion. And that's the kind of fear that they've pushed on people: rolling blackouts, grid failures. Matter of fact, I was just looking at, one of these articles, and that was, ironically, I was reading and showing that exact part where you were talking about the grid going down in Texas. And, you're looking at all these low temperatures. So, a lot of people are not going to be prepared for this. And then we get into the question, what if this becomes more of the norm and less of once in a while? Because right at the top of the article, it says temperatures drop below normal. What is normal, though, for a long period? How long have they been looking at that? And doesn't all of this new information is going to really upset the standard of what's going on, the propaganda that's going on? Because we know if we continue to have winters as cold as it is now, or the last one, that Arctic ice and Antarctic ice are going to continue to grow. And then what do they say there? Matter of fact, I lost it, but I saw an article, I think it was in the UK or somewhere in Europe, where they had the global warming activists out there in the road, and the police had to bring them blankets and stuff because it was freezing out there. It's ridiculous to know that the people that are in charge of the backup safety net of our nations have no care in the world for us. And matter of fact, their admitted plan is to reduce all of the things that fuel civilization and keep us comfortable, especially fossil fuels. Not only fossil fuels, but think about this. If there's a reduced amount of meat, right, continually for years, so just for an example, or a trend goes where people eat less meat and they continue to eat things that are grown in depleted soil. Let's just leave it at just those two things because we don't want to get too far down the rabbit hole. But just those two things, year after year, they do that, and then they deal with colder and colder weathers. What do you think happens to the amount of illnesses and sicknesses that happen, viruses and colds and whatnot? Well, they go up because everybody's immune system is down from having bad diet, and then at the same time, trying to save money by keeping the thermostat all the way down, or maybe they can't even afford heat, or maybe they're outside. But these are all the kind of things that I don't know about a dark winter, but what I see is a dark decade starting right now. All of the programs that are being implemented, as I say many times, are totally against what it means for us in the human domain to be successful, comfortable, and be able to, continue our civilization. Everything that they're throwing at us are wrenches designed to get in the gears to stop the machine, so that we are forced to seek help. But people like us are not going to seek that help, obviously, because we're already thinking about any scenario. So whether or not, the grids all go out or not, I don't know, because the people that listen to this program, I'm sure they have 2 or 3 things they're thinking about right now that they're going to be doing in case that happens. I do. For example, I know exactly what I'm going to do. Like if something like that happens, we are not going to freeze here. Now, I do live in an area that's not going to get anywhere as near cold as some of these other places. And if you see that cold front go right down into Texas, where it did last time, though. So it wouldn't be that surprising to me see the grid go out. And matter of fact, isn't that actually in the best interest of the powers that be that want to reduce power to humans, or at least the peasant class in their feudalistic new system? They want to cut us off. And I'm worried, like, how long do you put up with stuff? Like if I lived in Europe, I would have already moved. They have so many rules on free speech. They're trying to make rules on farming, on what you can eat, what you can say. Like the whole thing is bizarre. It's like a movie that was created in the 80s to scare us. And I know there's several of them that depict what's going on pretty good right now. Further than that, where do we go? And I think that whole area and even the name of that dark winter is really made to keep people in a perpetual fear state so that they can't think. When you're afraid or you're in pain or you're uncomfortable or you're sick or you're distracted, you can't concentrate on what it takes to keep you and your family healthy and safe because, your brain's not working right. From the food, the weather, etc. And I think that's like the overall program for the entire planet right now. Keep you of low energy, keep you distracted, keep you fearful, and always engaged in the newest emergency. And this is where I think that we need to have a breakaway civilization of a voluntary group. You don't have to group up with people. Matter of fact, that's a bad idea in today's geopolitical situation with governments turning on their own people, classifying them as the enemy. But what I mean is a breakaway civilization that involves the individual person, recognizing that their responsibility for their safety, livelihood, success, their children's safety, livelihood, and success is completely, or at least mostly, in their hands. Meaning that you can prep, you can get extra blankets, you can find older style appliances that work, and you can look for any of these backup systems that will lower the brunt of anything that happens. And whenever you're capable, you're able and capable of helping other people that, let's face it, 90% of people are not going to prepare for anything. They don't even have $1,000 in the bank. They're living from paycheck to paycheck. The worries on their mind are the ones that are given to them from the television, and then the rest of their mentality is locked up, worrying about rent, worrying about bills, worrying about all of these social things that don't matter, like what group you're in, what's your political affiliation. Guess what? None of that matters when you're freezing in your house and the power's out. The Democrat next door and the Republican on the other side of you are probably both freezing. So it doesn't matter what political affiliation you have or your beliefs on social interactions or the way things are going to be, because the people at the top don't care about you. The only reason that they participate in these arguments is to further fuel the distraction and pacify the public so that they are completely and utterly prepared for any scenario that comes their way, not excluding government hand in that. And what I mean is that if things get bad enough, like we've seen before, say a really bad situation happens because of this cold front. I'm just talking about this like a what if. It could turn into a Katrina type situation very fast. And what do I mean by that? I mean, people that don't have anything, that didn't prepare, will be out trying to steal and take from those who did. And the government's response will not be to protect you, but to come and control and disarm you as well, because they don't want competition. And I think that's why right now they're pushing all of these Civil War ideas. They get, we talked about the statues last week, and the last main one that they tore down as a big symbol was the reconciliation statue for the end of the War of the Civil War. So they tore that down. They want everybody to forget that we did have a civil war to fix problems with our situation, and then it was over, and we reconciliated, and we became one nation again, and we have been since. And since then, they've been trying to tear us apart with different angles, racial angles, economic angles, political. And right now, they have the best chance that they've ever had with the most brainwashed public ever to spark something. And it could start with a natural disaster. People will be pointing fingers and saying, why didn't you do this? And but look at them over there. They're prepared. And you've seen the government specifically watch and go after preppers, people in militias, and et cetera. Now they're trying to pass laws that are on its face anti-constitutional. And the reason they're doing that is to further get people to pick sides until it comes to a point when a flash will happen. And that's what they want. They want complete and utter chaos while they redesign everything in the background so that when it's over, in the rubble, when people are starving, cold, sick, they have someone to go to, and that someone is government who never lets an emergency go to waste. Every single time there is a disaster, an emergency, a war, or something, that changes in culture, there's new laws passed which allow government to gain more power. And like I said before, they never get rid of that power. Never. Government protects itself, not you. And that's what I mean by this kind of breakaway civilization of the individual. You don't need the government. The government's only job, if you live in America, was to protect your inalienable rights. It's obvious they no longer do that. They have other functions that they're worried about. So it's up to you to protect your own inalienable rights, which includes your own safety, your own future. And I hate to say it to all those people out there that have their hand out. There's no one coming to help you but you, period.
That's a bold statement. Yeah, that's right. Nobody's coming to help you except you and your neighbors and the people you prepared with around your community. And, getting to test your resolve of your power going off and on and off and on for weeks or a week or even days. You'll realize where your extension cords are in the wrong position. You realize you don't have enough splitters. You're just going to realize a lot of things, like you might need some battery backups in case your power goes out, and gives you enough time to, because in the power outage, if you're running your computer, boom, it just turns off unless you have one of those things on the wall that gives you an extra 15 minutes of battery power to then be able to start the generator and plug it in. It'll be a learning curve, how to keep your pipes warm. During that Texas time, how many tens of billions of dollars were done in damage from freezing pipes in the houses? Well, this will affect far more states. You're going to be looking at catastrophic insurance claims, like the most ridiculous amounts of homeowner insurance claims. Now, will that perpetuate again, where then insurance companies will raise your rates, and the insurance company might look at this as one giant feeding fest where, all right, if you claim on your pipes, we're going to double your rate. And then, a lot of people are already at the edge of being able to pay for home insurance, property taxes, food costs, et cetera. And then all of a sudden your homeowner's insurance doubles. Then what? It seems like everybody's getting pulled and pushed and, taking advantage of situations. And then, insurance companies are no different than governments. Come on, don't delude yourself. Lawyers are no different either. If you're a lawyer out there, any attorneys listening, your profession has a bad reputation of vultures within it. Not everyone, obviously, but it seems a large share. Right along with corporate bankers. There's a lot of vultures in that group. There's some that want to do good with the money and really try to change society. But on an overall basis, no. Greed rules the roost. And you mentioned Taiwan earlier, and I was looking through market news feed as we were talking there. Taiwan Defense Ministry, 5 Chinese balloons entered the defense zone in the last 24 hours. And that was at 2:47 p.m. That's their time in Taiwan versus East Coast time. Remember, there's a 12-hour time difference. So things like that are changing a little bit. The idea of we or Taiwan not being involved in any of this. Suddenly you got all these all those balloons all over the place over there. Now, the Houthis have issued a new statement that they're saying, here we go, this is a new statement just came out of the Houthis, so breaking news for everybody here. A senior Houthi member, they don't even give the person's name. That's what I don't like to read these too much and really, take it with a grain of salt, because they didn't give a senior Houthi member should have a name associated with them because they're a senior member of that faction group, whatever you want to call them, has said that their group, the Houthis, will burn American battleships and bases, and we will confront America, kneel it down, burn its battleships and all of its bases, and everyone who cooperates with it, no matter what the cost. Okay, thanks for that. But then it does continue here that coming off the Telegraph, suddenly a new article just released. Wow, isn't that interesting? Right after all of this is happening, this is at 4:21, which would have been 1 hour earlier and 1 or 2 hours after the strikes started. Telegraph releasing this: women are the solution to the armed forces recruitment crisis. Convenient timing on that. Like everybody's going to be searching the news tomorrow, and then they plugged this one straight into the feed along with all the war coverage. Women are the solution to the armed forces recruitment crisis. He says that half of society is women, but they hardly serve in the army. But there's an objective reason for this. Okay, well, yeah, I don't want to, pick up 90-pound packs and go through the mud and be cold and stuff. That's probably one of the reasons why. So currently they're saying that women only make up 11% of the fighting force in the UK, but they want to bring that up to something around double of that. There's a lot of scandals, obviously. And also, here's another one that's coming off the same news feed. We didn't even talk about this. Well, you did. You touched on it briefly, Ransom, for like a second there. The tanker seized by the Iranians. Turns out that originally it was an Iranian tanker that was carrying crude that was seized by the Americans because of, quote unquote, breaking sanctions. So the Iranians basically took back their own tanker that the Americans stole from them. Or if you're looking at it the American view, the Iranians stole back their own tanker, which is pretty interesting. They had, followed this. The original name was the Suez Rajan, originally belonged to a Greek company, was chartered by the Iranians. However, when they were transporting cargo, the Americans seized the commercial ship in the Red Sea, and then it obviously belongs to somebody else now because of the seizure with the sanctions. Well, Iran was able to track this ship for quite some time and be like, yo, bro, that's our ship. We're taking it back. So they ended up seizing their own tanker back after the Americans had seized it from them first. So, the news pivot around this one is very much just one-sided. Oh, the Iranians seized a tanker. Yeah, but it was loaded with oil, so they lost over 100,000 tons of oil in the original U.S. seizure of that tanker. Well, the Iranians just seized that tanker back, their own original tanker, full of oil. So I guess it was a tit for tat. You steal our tanker full of oil, we're going to steal our own tanker back full of oil, and we'll all call it even on the transaction there. This is the way it looks, and that's as bizarre. It really is bizarre as that sounds. That's truly what's happening. And now all the images are coming out on your social media feeds about the British strikes on Yemen. Oh, you know how they're trying to say now U.S.-British strikes, but wait, I thought Canadians were in there and Netherlands was in there, and they're only showing U.S.-British strikes. Where are the Canadian strikes? Where are the Netherlands strikes? It's a bunch of BS. They're calling it a coalition, but it's not. I want to see the footage of the Canadian strikes. Oh, wait, there is none. Sorry. Which brings me to Robusta beans. Anybody out there, coffee fans? Wake up, wake up. I forget, I saw this guy who's a DJ had a gold microphone. And he's like, wake up. Super classic. I got to send you, Ransom, that. You me laughing when you see that. It's about got to get up, got to get up. Need the coffee, need the Robusta. Anyway, you're looking at 12-year high. Yeah, do you know that one? You know that you've seen that one where he goes, get up. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hey, Robusta prices are going up 12-year highs, and they're expected to go even higher now with all these disruptions coming out of Indonesia and Vietnam. So everywhere we look, not only is it the olive oil, but now it's the coffee prices and all of this, so I easily tag up one thing. You're probably going to have to do more work to break even, just in a general sense of us just doing what we do, because things are getting more expensive, things are getting less available, and I got a sinking gut feeling that this is going to disrupt the oil flow on the planet here. So, what is your plan B? What happens if gasoline goes to $8 or $10 a gallon? Then what? I mean, a lot of businesses will close, you're right. But then what about you as the personal individual listening to this broadcast tonight? What is your plan B if gasoline reaches 10? What's your plan C if it goes to 20? What happens at that point? Generators run until they don't. I got 30 gallons for my extra generator. And looking at 1 gallon per 8 hours on my Honda generator. Great. That's a long time. But what happens if my neighbor needs some or somebody else needs some? What are they willing to trade for it? And are you willing to trade fuel? Because fuel keeps that generator going, which keeps your home running. And it's at what point, when you run out of fuel, at that point, what happens? Are you able to go in and buy 5 gallons of $20 fuel? Silver prices would spike by then too. So maybe you want to buy some silver and use that because the silver price will stay the same. So you're spending, let's say, $20 an ounce of silver. If oil or gasoline goes to $20 a gallon, for sure the silver price is going to $150. So you'll still be able to get the same amount of gallons as we get today with that same ounce of silver. So I don't know, plan B, plan C, because I'm looking at it going, we need to be planning extra. And you're good at planning, Ransom. You always have something going on. I know your style. But a lot of people aren't, and will carpooling become a thing again? My dad told me about, fuel prices rose during the oil embargo, and man, this thing called carpooling, boom, popped out of nowhere. During the COVID, nobody ever knew what takeaway food was in Italy and Croatia. It didn't. You went to the cafe to have your coffee. There was no takeaway coffee. But that arose out of nothing. They had to create the demand. So prior to COVID, in Europe here, there was no coffee takeaway like there is in Starbucks. It just didn't exist. You went to the cafe, you had your morning roast, you had your afternoon, you had your evening, whatever, to keep your energy going. So it was such a foreign concept to have a coffee cup to-go cup station in an Italian coffee shop. It was it was outside the radar of even imaginability. And also going to the cafes and sitting down and there was no takeaway food, very little. I mean, yeah, you could grab a pastry and take it away, but as we understand takeaway full meals, that only started during COVID, and there's a big service called Wolt, W-O-L-T, which is like our Uber Eats. That it's still here, it dominates. You can't go anywhere without seeing one of these things. So the changes in society were vast and swift. So it could be vast and swift again, but how is it going to deal with massive fuel shortages? That's the question. I don't have the answer. I really don't. So maybe Ransom does, and love to hear what you got to say. Who, and anybody out there, I know we can't see you, but raise your hand if you got a plan B and C, because you might want to start putting that in action right now.
I don't know. If it gets too bad, my plan is just to become an ancient hunter-gatherer from about 40,000 years ago, rummaging through, belongings that once belonged to the middle class, rich, and others that are no longer around. I hope it never gets to that. My plan is to keep doing what I've always been doing, which is to live on little. And then whenever times are hard, it's not very hard to do it. So, if you're the kind of person that goes out, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with having a good time, but if that's your main goal in life is one pleasure after another, whether it's going out to eat, and then you find yourself in an emergency and you realize, hey, maybe I should have saved some money all this time, or at least backed up a plan. Because, I go to some people's houses in the past. I've gone over to their house and I'm like, hey, you got something to drink? And they're like, yeah, there's water or something in the fridge. And you go over there and you open their fridge and there's like condiments. And this is like a family household, which tells me that they don't buy groceries ahead of time. They buy what they eat when they eat it. And I'm wondering how many families are now converted over to this just-in-time style of shopping for their house, because it's one thing to have it in business, which leads to supply shortages if anything happens, because it's not there in time anymore if something happens. But if you're doing that with your household, you're going to have problems. And the same thing goes for gas, tires, tools, et cetera. If they're things that allow you to function in life, you should have already taken care of the majority of that before there ever was a problem. And unfortunately, millions of people are just not like that. They're so stuck on the corporatized purchasing idea of life. They think they need to roll through and get a coffee or have stuff delivered to them nonstop. It tastes good. And there's a weird thing in science too. If you eat anything in 24 hours, your brain has reset. So like, say you ate Domino's pizza for lunch and you had a hamburger from some restaurant at, later at night for dinner. What's going to happen to you necessarily is the next day, when you get hungry again, your brain pictures the last idea or intake that it had. So if you're eating horribly, your brain is addicted to that really fast and wants to eat that again. But it works the opposite way too. So if you're eating healthy, guess what you're craving when you get hungry again? You crave healthy stuff. You crave some meat and vegetables. And that is not in most of people, because what they eat is all corporate foods. Even if they go to the grocery store and they buy large amounts of it, the majority of it is food-like stuffs like we talk about a lot, and that's what they're craving. But I know at some point those things will be cut off. And when they are cut off, there's going to be a lot of people that are really behind on nutrition. And so they're going to get sick. And then, with supply chain problems, just looking at that whole thing in the Middle East, it's so obvious what they were doing. And I almost bet you, matter of fact, I remember a show last year where we were talking about those two straits in the Middle East, the Red Sea and the other one, as conflicts happening. And think about this. The U.S. steals a ship full of oil, then sells the oil, and then the country takes it back, and we're supposed to act like that was some kind of big deal, when earlier this year and prior years, our government has given billions of dollars to that same country. Now, they don't have a lot of resources going on actively. They do. It's in the ground, and they have other resources like in Iran. But obviously, something different what's going on. And if you've been paying attention to the peninsula there, you'll know that Saudi Arabia and Israel and other countries have had a problem with Yemen and Oman and different stuff, because there are people that don't conform to their styles of government. And that's what we're seeing right now, is they're mopping up the last of the other regimes in that area. And when it's over, you're only going to have a few players, probably a newly formed Iran and Saudi Arabia, Dubai, Qatar, that little conglomerate of rich nations that always do business with both sides. If you pay attention to them, they do business with the U.S., they'll do business with Russia and China. They don't care. And that's why they have all of these mega cities built out in the middle of the desert, while on the other end of that same desert, people are starving, people are hungry, people are homeless. So they become rebels. And I'm not saying what they're doing is wrong in any way, shape, or form, but that's part of the reason that there's piracy, and it's so easy to, accumulate what one government is calling a terrorist, the other one's calling it a group, whatever their name is. And weirdly, if you remember, Trump named this group a terrorist organization, and when Biden got in office, he removed them from that, which means that we were not paying attention to them as much. And now all of a sudden we're about to start bombing those same people. This is going to spread all through that region, and there are several players that have plans for the area, and none of them are going to strengthen or help the United States. That's why I wonder why it's us again and the UK that are using their military might to take care of problems that have nothing to do with the nations that are using the military now. And that goes back into what we were talking about before. The world and our country specifically is getting in tune with the fact that we're having wars for no reasons. So they're not having the same number of people feeling patriotic going and enlisting. So, you know, and it's bizarre, and I don't want to get into this too far, but it's bizarre that they changed their recruiting tactics to get people that normally wouldn't join the military to join the military, which makes others in the military uncomfortable, and then at the same time demonize certain groups and then wonder why they're not joining. And who wants to, and I'll tell you specifically, I don't want my children fighting in any war on this planet as right now, because none of them are justified wars, in my opinion, from either side fighting. And why should my children go around the world and die for things that have nothing to do with us here? The only thing that it remotely has something to do with here is in an economic way, the prices of things. Yeah, it's horrible, but are you okay with your country starting a bunch more wars and giving you economic problems to supposedly have a better future in the future? It's all a sham. And, you know, the only people that ever make out in these conflicts are these, you know, big companies, the contractors, the banking. They make money from destroying it. They make money from rebuilding. And when you look at places like Africa and other places that we've dumped trillions of dollars into, and then look at those countries now, they didn't do anything with the money. I don't know where it went or who got it, but, you know, some people got new cars. And as in the case of Ukraine, people spend a lot of money on hookers, cocaine, and brand new cars, but they're still losing the war. And now that, speaking of Ukraine, now that they've killed all their young people, they want ours to go fight. And I say no. I say no. I'm going to opt out. I want my children to opt out if they choose to, and I don't want any part of it. So I'm going to start my own breakaway civilization.
I have a question. I'm going to ask you a question. Why is China not concerned about global warming, or why isn't China concerned about global warming there, Ransom? Do you have an answer?
Yeah, it's the same reason insurance companies keep insuring condos and multi-million-dollar hotels along coasts that are supposedly going to be sinking from sea level change. The reason that they don't care is because they know it's nonsense. They know it's designed to destroy the Western world, which is in their benefit. And they know that a petroleum-based economy and all of these things are what's going to build their empire, which is what's been building their empire all of this time. That's why there's no regulations on them from the world. They have as many coal power plants as they want. They'll burn as much fossil fuel as they want because they know that it's a global scam that's working in their benefit. They're already communist. Of course, they don't need to be tricked into being
communist. That's right. That's the answer. They're already communist. They already have a communist government. Good answer, man. That's it. The scam is on the rest of the world that they're trying to take us into global communism across the entire planet under this guise of global warming. But since the model's already in place, China's off the hook. They've already implemented the model. So what are these other communist nations that have very close to Chinese model that aren't being called out for pollution or CO2 emissions? There's got to be a list of them. Because the reason I was trying to segue in there, there's Media Matters, our favorite. Oh, goody, Media Matters. I almost like gag when I get into this site. But anyway, they have a new headline I couldn't resist. Climate change conspiracy theory about cataclysmic changes in Earth's magnetic field goes viral on TikTok. They're blaming Joe Rogan for talking about the Adam and Eve story. So they're saying this is directly fueling climate change misinformation, and they are calling on TikTok to absolutely look into these allegations that Joe Rogan is now breaking and violating the app's new climate misinformation policy, to have him deplatformed and removed off of TikTok because he talks with Jimmy Corsetti about the Adam and Eve story. Now, if anybody's not familiar with that, it just talks about the Earth's magnetic field moving and wandering much faster than what traditional quote unquote science tells us it is. They'll tell you the Lechamp excursion, or they'll go further back in time. They'll say that it only happened 700,000 years ago one time. But if you do look at these, repeated flips, now maybe it doesn't go into a full 100% north-south swap, but you get these undulations of somewhere like 60 to 80% in polar wander, where it's 80% of the way there of flipping, and then it doesn't, but it returns back to its spot. And talking about this and the amount of devastation in cloud cells and jet streams that it brings on society, every 6,500 years, it flips 90 degrees, not the full 100. So you get these polar wander events. And it sure looks that we're right at about that 6,500 year mark again. So this was their whole discussion. Now, what is so outrageous to talk about the Earth's magnetic field flipping faster based on declassified documents that show that there's a pattern that's mappable, and we're back at this point again? So is it the magnetic field excursion that's bringing on what is considered grand solar minimum effects of out-of-place jet streams and cloud cells? And they're saying, well, no, this polar reversal thing, it takes thousands of years, not just days. Now, you can't listen to these two guys talk, is basically what they're saying. So even as we go through, the narrative is there. They have to keep pushing it because we're not a communist nation yet. As soon, Canada's real close to being fully overtaken and communist policies implemented with roundups, et cetera. I mean, look what they did with their people with the trucking strike and what they're doing with debanking individuals and the loss of speech of any type unless it's 100% with the narratives. I mean, the Western nation, the two that are closest to moving over to communism right now would be Canada, well, actually three, Australia and New Zealand. They are absolutely compromised and moving into that type of communist system. Now, you notice the closer you get to the communist system, the more they're pushing the global warming and the whole climate change agenda onto the citizens of the country. Have you noticed that? There's a direct correlation. The closer they get to socialism/communism, the more requirements are for the non-usage of power to bring the people back into a very substandard lifestyle, which is basically communism. So, the implemented policies, and where does it start? I'm trying to wrap this back. It wraps back into these local elections. And if you're going to try to make change on the global level, you need to start at the local elections, because a lot of these directives and mandates that are put forth by the World Economic Forum are implemented at the local levels first. So then there's no culpability, like we didn't do it as in that. No, the American government didn't make you do that. But it sits that, these layers of disconnect are stark, but they're all running toward the same programs. So how many of you been to your local town hall meetings? Have you gone in and sat on any sessions? Do you even know who your politicians are? Like, what are they talking about in their meetings? You'd be surprised at what they're bringing global governance down into your neighborhood because they've been elected and they're being paid to implement. And the more they implement these ESG and global warming policies, nobody's in there to push back on it. Like, they would be terrified of me in the beginning until they would try to have me removed. And I'm saying moved out of that city, probably by knowing the police or knowing the sheriffs and causing problems, because I was upsetting the apple cart in the local area because they dominate these. TVA is just a perfect example of moving over to a socialist system to cut power, reliable power, all based on a fictitious lie as these ice ages come and go, that we have more power than the ice age to change our climate is just the most smug, ridiculous, concept for us. And then to discount that magnetic excursions will have any change on the weather either, in addition to the sun, that it's only human driven and it's only cow driven. You start to look at this, and this moves us into communism. And when you get there, then what do you have? You got your gulags, and you got your yes men, and you got your completely censored speech, bought and paid for reporters and those in the media that will kowtow to 100% narrative regurgitation, word for word, Because if you notice those collages of things that they do when you see the news, and they start off with one talking head news person saying, and it's the climate change. And then the next one follows with the exact same words. And then you get like 50 on the screen and they say the exact same words. This is where it takes us. And we are already there. And you know what? It all began at the local level, from your local town halls to your local politicians, the counties, then to the state. So if you're going to make anything happen, we're going to have to start at the local level first. So I encourage everybody to go out there and join your local government's meeting, wherever form or shape it takes, and see what they're talking about. This is where it starts, locally. Please avoid communism at all costs. It sucks. Anyway, thanks for listening to us. David DuByne, Ransom Godwin signing out. We'll see you next week. Many Ice Age Conversations. Signing off. Bye for now.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio.
What the heck is the...